Stay young. Let the music be played, let the songs now be sung. Back in Indiana, we never really did know there were folks like music therapists round. Such a thing to learn today. I had a stroke, and look at me now. I learned to play the music somehow. Whoever thought we'd see it in the halls of Congress today? There is music playing and songs being sung. It must be the start of something brand new. So I'm growing old. Help me stay forever young.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the Woodson Handbell Choir, special education students from Abilene Independent School District in Abilene, Texas. They are directed by Letha McGrew. Let's give them a welcome. We have with us Dr. Bill Chase from San Clemente, California, accompanied by Paul Nolan, an esteemed registered music therapist in Philadelphia. Let's welcome Paul and Bill.
Senator Burns from Montana. I would have sung along with you, but I can remember the days when my kids were real small. We used to go to church, and they'd always ask me before I walked into church, "Dad, are you going to sing today?" And if I said, "Yes, I am," they always sat on the other side of the church. So I didn't want to spoil the party.
A special performance by music therapist Ken Miedema.
Senator Reid is running late, so we'll have to vamp a while. Oh, one thing I should have told you before we started, and that is that the song was originally intended to accompany a universal handshake. So if you wouldn't mind shaking hands with at least 35 people around you. 1, 2, 3, shake 'em, bound together. Finally woven, we're bound together. Finally woven, we're bound together. Finally woven with love. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sing and dance in the morning sun. Sing and dance by the rivers running. Ooh, sing and dance in the pale moonlight, children. Sing and dance, let the music echo in the night, night, night. Yeah, 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 I said we're bound together and finally woven. We're bound together and finally woven. We're bound together and finally woven. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention to you. I should have told you the song was Originally designed to accompany the worldwide shoulder rub. So if you wouldn't mind rubbing shoulders with at least 17 people. 1, 2, 3, rub-y-dum. Bound together, finely woven, we're bound together and finely woven, we're bound together and finely woven with la. Yeah. Sing and dance in the city street now. Gather everybody round, sing and dance, let your music fill this weary town. Oh yeah, bound together and finely woven, we're bound together and finely woven, we're bound together and finely woven. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. Song was originally intended to accompany a universal hug-a-thon, and if it's not too embarrassing to you, if you would embrace about 13 people around you while we sing 1, 2, 3, do it properly. Bound together, finely woven, we're bound together, and finely woven, we're bound together, and finely woven with love. Yeah. Well, we are bound together and finely woven. We're bound together and finely woven with love. Finely woven with love. Yeah.
Welcome this morning to this hearing of the Select Special Committee on Aging. We're meeting to consider a topic never before directly raised by Congress, the therapeutic value of music. Some may ask, and have asked, and justifiably so, what's so important about music? Isn't it simply entertainment or recreation? In fact, today's witnesses will tell us that music can work like medicine. Simply put, music can heal people. Music is not only therapeutic, it is inexpensive. Government does not have a lot of money to spare these days for new programs. Whenever a worthy solution is offered for a major problem, someone always interrupts, how much is it going to cost? Music therapy is an innovative approach that won't widen the deficit, but can help millions of older Americans live happier, more fulfilling lives. And we really can get these impressive results, as the saying goes, for a song. Before I complete my opening statement, though, I'm pleased that we will have with us this morning the chairman, the full chairman of this Select Committee on Aging. He will talk to us today via satellite from his office in Little Rock, Arkansas. Incidentally, this is the first time in Senate history that a senator makes an opening statement before a committee by satellite. Senator David Pryor, who is widely recognized as one of the nation's foremost leaders on issues of concern to the elderly, suffered a heart attack earlier this year. He has been sorely missed by all of us. We're pleased to have the chairman participate this morning. Hello, David.
Harry, good morning to you. And I might say that I'm standing in front of the federal building in Little Rock, Arkansas. So already this morning it's getting rather hot. We've just had, I'm sorry he's left, we've just had the state bird with us. The state mockingbird has been with us this morning here out in front of the federal building, and we thought for the benefit of all of those in the audience, we'd give Arkansas a little free concert here as we talk about music and the mockingbird and those contributions the mockingbird has made. It's been now about 3 months since I've been in Washington, as Senator Reid has said, and Harry, this is wonderful that you're chairing this hearing, and you and your staff have done such a wonderful job in preparation. We want to thank you all, and we certainly owe you and your people and all of the staff people a debt of gratitude for the preparation. But what we want to make certain is that this hearing is the first of its kind. We're going to explore some, I think, some pioneer territory this morning in the hearing in Washington. And the witnesses that you have assimilated who are coming to the hearing are going to be those witnesses with a great deal not only of hands-on experience, but the real day-to-day living with those individuals with Alzheimer's, dementia, with stroke, and with other disease and ailments, where music is playing and can play such a critical and important role. To the wonderful panel that has come, many of you have come from a long way from across the country to participate in this most unique hearing this morning of the Senate Committee on Aging. We want to thank you, everyone, for your participation. I started to say it's been about 3 months since I've been in Washington, and I've been in Arkansas recuperating. And once again, I'm reminded of it's not of the fact, I guess, that I've tried to learn in my own experience. It's not just prescription drugs, and it's not just exercise. It's not just changing your lifestyle. It's not just hospital care or good doctors or good nurses or good clinics. It's something else that we've got to have, and we're looking for it constantly in the system of healthcare delivery. And we think music can and will play a very critical, new and expanded role in not only providing for the psychological, the emotional aspect of being sick or being old or having Alzheimer's, to trigger good memories and to trigger positive and constructive thoughts. So having said this, let me turn this back over to you, Harry, once again thanking our panel. I'm sorry I couldn't be here. I've been promised a video of the entirety of this hearing. I look forward to watching that video, listening to the witnesses, and seeing what all of you have to say. I think there's a plane going over. I think that's crowding me out a little bit. We thank all of you once again. Have a good time. Learn a lot. We're going to share some experiences together today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. David, thank you very much. We'll hear that for many older Americans, music can increase in alertness, physical vigor, and their capacity to continue meaningful relationships. Thousands of older Americans and those with disabilities are learning that music therapy improves their lives. They find it reaches further than traditional medications. According to 90-year-old Ida Goldman, who's seated before me, music is better than medicine. Like medicine, music must be used properly to get results. This simple idea has been recognized for thousands of years. Sir Francis Bacon explained to the King of England in the 17th century, the poets did well to conjoin music and medicine because the office of medicine is but to tune the curious harp of man's body and to reduce it to harmony. Today we can use scientific methods to examine and refine how to use music as medicine. This hearing will document the current state of research in this relatively new field of scientific inquiry. We will also hear from people who have had remarkable experiences with music therapy. You may wonder, what is music therapy? We don't often think of music as something that can be used in a clinic, yet there are 5,000 certified music therapists across the country, some of whom are with us here today. They use carefully selected musical activities in hospitals, nursing homes, senior centers, rehabilitation centers, and other institutions. These therapists are well trained to assess people's needs and to apply the right activities to improve their physical, mental, or emotional lives. Witnesses today will testify that Alzheimer's patients who have lost the ability to talk or to relate to their loved ones can still sing or dance. I know this because a former staffer of mine, Dana Gentry, has a grandmother in Las Vegas who suffers from Alzheimer's. Dana tells me she mumbles incoherently and doesn't even know she or her mother is in the nursing home. But something special happens with music. I'd like to read to you from a letter that Dana wrote to me last week. Quote, I love Grandma deeply and feel robbed by whatever demon has stolen her mind. Reaching back through the years, I thought of the times when she held me in her arms and sang to me. Kneeling beside her wheelchair, I sang our song directly into her ear. At first, it was just a slight glimmer of recognition that I noticed on her face. I was thrilled by that. And then she joined in. She sang the entire song, every word, and in harmony. And in the end, as tears rolled down my cheeks, she cried too, as if, for the moment, she realized her accomplishment. We sing at every visit now. Sometimes when she sings, I have her back, if only till the end of the song. End of quote. Dana's story illustrates a point. No music cannot cure Alzheimer's, but new research demonstrates it can keep their minds awake and lift a veil of sadness. Dr. Oliver Sacks will tell us of awakenings that occur from music in Parkinson's and other neurologically afflicted patients. The film Awakenings, based on Dr. Sacks' book, delivers this message, one that deserves our attention. His top performers will give us their perspective on music potential as a healing tool. Mickey Hart, drummer for the Grateful Dead for the past 25 years, and author of a recent book on the history of drumming, which I had here, and I hope someone hasn't swiped it, will share his insight. Theodore Bickel, a star on Broadway and in motion pictures, as well as a fabulous folk singer, that's where I first heard Theodore Bickel, will explain how music can keep us vibrant at any age. Today's hearing raises the question, do we need further research into music therapy? I think we do, because early evidence indicates that it serves those suffering from Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, strokes, depression, and other disabling conditions. Music therapy is a new field that shows great promise. Older persons may well benefit from further research. Healthy older persons can also benefit from music. Dr. Frank Wilson will explain that older persons can learn to make music at any time in life. In fact, learning to play an instrument can keep older persons alert and creative. Music has a positive impact on many people, from those in the best of health to those with severe neurological disorders. The federal government's concern is with those who are most vulnerable. Early and disabled individuals deserve Congress's attention. Congress can also remind our older citizens that learning music has rewards at any age. The goal of this hearing is to discover what is known about music's role in the survival of human vitality. We will learn that music helps all types of people to remain forever young. Senator Cohen?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As members of the audience may have detected, these beepers that are going off have just announced that a vote is underway. So I'm going to be very brief in my comments. But to extend my congratulations to Senator Pryor, this is the first time I've seen him since his heart attack. We've been reading not only about him, but articles authored by him telling of his experience and some of the lessons he has learned in going through that traumatic experience of suffering a major heart attack. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the poets. I remember reading Shakespeare, who said that music can minister to minds deceased and pluck from the memory of rooted sorrow, raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with its sweet oblivious antidote cleanse the full bosom of all perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart. So I think that poets for years and years have recognized the importance of music to the spirit. And Mrs. Goldman, when the chairman mentioned that you were 90 years old, I have an 82-year-old father who still works 18 hours a day. And I go back on weekends to work in his bakery. But the thing that we enjoy most is we listen to jazz every Sunday. He digs out his old tapes and records, and the two of us just sit there listening to some of the giants of the music world, going back to jazz at the Philharmonic. And I can't begin to express to the people who are here what that does when I see him and the light that comes on in his eyes when we listen to that music together. So I'm personally fully aware of the therapeutic value of music. And it's not only for older people. There is an experiment going on in Japan. I don't know the name offhand of the physician, but for years now he has been playing music to the fetus in pregnant women. And they have found there are extraordinary results coming from that, with early development for multilingual opportunities. They develop much more rapidly than those without the benefit of that music having been played during that time. And that's something that I want to explore at a later hearing. But just let me conclude by welcoming all of our witnesses here today and simply say that I believe that music indeed does rescue the heart from despair, particularly those who are confined to institutions who may have suffered the loss of a spouse, the loss of their independence, and the loss of their homes. Music can play a very important role in rescuing that heart from despair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Grassley.
Mr. Chairman, I've got more to learn from this hearing probably than anybody else. I used to sing in church on Sunday until people would turn around and see who was singing behind them, and I soon got the message that I probably don't sing very well. And you know, the true value is probably something that we all have to learn here, and I'm glad to know that music is very instrumental in helping people this way. I'm sorry that I was late, so I was involved in other business, but my staff tells me that the introduction was a perfect demonstration of the power of music to affect people. The letter you read from Dana Jennery was moving and a very good introduction for this hearing. The topic that we take up today is a very interesting one, even for this committee, which has taken up many interesting topics over the years that I've been a member of. And this committee has shown the ability to really get large crowds out for important hearings. And the size of this crowd demonstrates the interest as well as the importance of this hearing, as well as we have a very good turnout. I think exploration of this topic will expand all of our horizons. I've said how I think it's going to help me a great deal. I understand that it seems pretty clear that music can be very effective as therapy or as an aid to therapy for ill and disabled older people, and can be a help and an inspiration to older people who are well. I was particularly interested to learn from reading in preparation for this committee that music can be very helpful in getting older people to exercise. I suppose that this is obvious when you think about it, but its importance may not be generally realized. I was interested in this because a recent report by the Institute of Medicine called The Second 50 Years contains a number of health promotion recommendations which, if followed, would enable older people to achieve and sustain better health and well-being. Among their recommendations was that exercise continues to be important in an older age in maintaining good health. Of course, I realize that this is just one of many important things that can be accomplished through music. I think that this hearing will have done a service, even if the only thing it does is help to spread the idea that music should become a bigger part of the lives of older people in whatever setting they may find themselves. If this committee can help more concretely by finding ways to encourage settings such as nursing homes and senior centers and congregate meal sites use of music in some of the ways our witnesses will describe today, then I say so much the better. So I'm looking forward to the testimony of our witnesses today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. If you would, Ms. Goldman, proceed with your testimony, and we'll do our best to be as attentive as possible. We greatly appreciate your waiting through all these opening statements.
If you laugh at different comics, if you root for different teams, waste no time, speak no more, tell him what the score is for. Rub him out of the roll call and drum him out of your dreams. Oh no, oh no. Wash that man right out of my hair. Wash that man right out of my hair. Wash that man right out of my hair and set it on his way. Wash that man right out of my hair. Wash that man right out of my hair. Wash that man right out of my hair and set him on his way. Mr. Chairman and members of this committee. My name is Ida Goldman. I'm 90 years old. I live at the Hebrew Home of Greater Washington in Rockville, Maryland. I'm happy to have a chance to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects, music. I love to sing, I like to dance, and all day long I hum my favorite tunes. One song after another, music makes my day. This past spring, our music therapist, Kathy Moland, directed our own version of South Pacific. The music was beautiful, and everyone seemed to enjoy the show. For the first time, we had 6 high school students play a part in the show. That was from the Churchill High School in Gaithersburg. I like it when we have 2 generations working together. It makes me happy to know that I'm able to entertain other people. I sang "I'm Gonna Wash That Man Right Out of My Hair." The beautiful music in the show was therapy to the people in the show as well as for the audience. Music is better than medicine. I know that for a fact. Before I had surgery, they told me I would never walk again. I had terrible pain in my leg and back. I couldn't even close my hand. And when I sat and listened to the music, I forgot all about the pain. Then I listened to the music, any kind of music. I don't think of anything else. My whole mind is only on this music I hear. Even dance to the music. My toes start tapping away. I hear music even in a restaurant. I like all kinds of music, and the waltz music is my favorite, Part of the therapy of music is that it brings many memories from past years. I can remember when my mother used to sing Yiddish songs to me. She sang to us all the time. I love to think of the songs that my husband sang to me, and you just heard that, "Let Me Call Me Sweetheart." My grandson Daniel just won a big award for playing the drums. It's a changing world, but one thing that never changes is music. We have a lot of music in our home. My friend Joe Arnold plays for us on every Saturday afternoon for 2 hours, Monday 1 hour, and he just started playing music for us Friday evening. He plays waltzes, classical music, and many of the singers. He plays big band music to give us a lift. Samuel Bogar plays his harmonica in the lobby every day. He can play almost any song, and he's an invalid. He is in a wheelchair. Our music therapist, Kathy Mullen, plays the piano beautifully. She plays for us every Thursday night, and she has music on every floor in the Hebrew home, and that's 4 floors. She works that all week long. The people in her handbell choir play beautifully. Some of the people are in very poor health, but they can still make pretty music. Kathy and Anita help us put on a musical every year. I have been in Annie Get Your Gun, Oliver, Oklahoma, Wizard of Oz, and South Pacific. I'm looking forward to make my next big hit next year. I hope you can all come and see it, because I'm inviting every one of you.
Thank you very much, Ms.
I really don't feel my age. I feel like a youngster. I get younger every day.
Would you please proceed, Ms. Johnson?
All right. Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, I want to thank you for this opportunity to let me tell you about music therapy as I witnessed it with my husband and other patients with dementia of the Alzheimer type. My name is Lois Johnson. I'm from McDonald, Kansas. I'm sure you're wondering, where is McDonald? McDonald's a small town in northwest Kansas, 150 people. I own and operate the only retail business in town, a small grocery store. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the disease as it happened to us. My husband, Tom, was only 48 years old. He managed a small grain elevator, a job he thoroughly loved, and I managed the small grocery store. Our last 3 kids left for college, and our first grandchild was on the way, and we felt things were just looking very good for us. Tom was always a very great family man. He never missed many events that his children performed in. On many times, we would go to one town and watch his sons perform in ball games and drive to another college and watch our daughter perform in a dance drill team. Tom was a very proud father. He was also very proud to be a volunteer fireman. He was very skilled with his hands. He remodeled our home several times. He made lots of gifts for his children and his friends. He could repair anything from a motor to a car. And he was also quite a prankster. As I can remember, one time he delivered a 2-ton rock, put it on his brother's front doorstep, and then put an ad in the local paper advertising a pet rock for sale. These were his pet jokes. But slowly this nightmare began. We first noticed that if he would make any excuse to avoid going to a sporting event or a family get-together or anything that had a lot of people involved, he became more and more withdrawn. His jokes and his puns became more of the cruel kind. He would go up to people and tell them, "You're getting very fat," or "You're getting bald-headed," or "You sure are getting gray." I can remember he started pinching and pulling hair, and it didn't seem to matter if he knew the people or not. One day the fire whistle blew, and Tom actually hid to keep from going to the fire. And suddenly one day he came up to me and he announced, "I've quit my job." And I said, "How in the world do you intend to pay the bills?" And he just looked at me and he said, "You can do it." That seemed to be his answer to everything at that time, is "You can do it." Tom had always been an affectionate, caring person, but now we noticed that he was becoming more and more withdrawn. He retreated to bed every chance he got, as though he could sleep away all the bad things that were happening to him. One son came home from college one vacation and he said, "Mom, all I see in Dad's eyes is blankness." The kids were noticing a big change in their father. Our youngest daughter lived with us at this time. She was waiting for her first teaching job to open up. And she came to me one day and she said, "Mom, I just can't stand this tormenting any longer. I'm going to have to move out before I hate my dad." I well understood what she meant, but can you imagine the terrible feelings we were going through? To me, this just seemed like a nightmare that had no end. 2 years passed before we got a diagnosis. Several months of this time Tom spent in a mental hospital. When we finally got the diagnosis, Tom was no longer the person that we used to have. He became a stranger, needing constant care and constant supervision. But we now had some answers to the strange things that have been happening. A dementia of this type attacks the short-term memory bank first. And the first things to go are their personality and their social graces. I often refer to this as the death of a personality because that's exactly what's happening. You're losing them in stages, and the personality is the very first. Slowly, everything else disappears, and they return to total infancy. When I could no longer take care of Tom, I took him to the Veterans Hospital in Topeka, Kansas. This was 300 miles from our home. I did go visit him several days each month. But by this time, Tom was so agitated, he could no longer sit or sleep, only for brief periods of time. I resorted to walking the hallways with him. There was no recognition left that I could see. He could no longer speak, not even one word, and I could no longer get eye contact with him. I noticed that Tom developed what I call the caged animal syndrome. He was always full of fear, always seeming to be fleeing from something that he didn't know what. On 3 different occasions, he eloped from the locked door ward. After Tom had been ill for about 6 years, the VA called me, and they said that Dr. Clare had selected Tom to be a student in her music therapy for the Alzheimer patient. And my first thought, I have to admit, was very selfish. I said, good. They're going to have to keep him at least 2 more months, and I'm not going to have to worry about what to do with him. And my second thought was, what in the world do they hope to accomplish? Here's a man that can't even speak. The first few sessions went just as I had planned, or had thought they would. Tom would not sit still. He would not participate. If they handed him an instrument, he simply laid it on the floor. But I went back several weeks later, and a wonderful thing was happening. Dr. Clare was sitting in front of Tom. She had eye contact. She was holding his hands. She was singing to him, and Tom was making sounds in his throat as though he was trying to respond. I just couldn't believe it. I even saw him reach towards the guitar and strum it. He played the maracas in a way that was only him. He would touch her knee, he would touch his head, and then his knee. And he did this in repetitious movement for as long as the music played. I could see tears in Tom's eyes whenever the patriotic songs or the hymns were played. The thrill of seeing just a little bit of the man that I used to know was just overwhelming. I knew that Tom could never get well, but music opened up a window to his soul that I just so badly needed at this time. I also observed changes in other dementia patients. One patient that had not spoke a complete sentence for a long time stood up and sang a jazz song from complete to finish without missing a beat. My daughter is a registered nurse, and she tells of a patient in her care that is very violent and aggressive, but his daughters can come and sing to him, and he calms right down. My mother developed a malignant brain tumor at the same time that Tom was sick. She returned also to her childhood, but we used music as a way to keep her calm too. During the last several months of Tom's life, he became the infant that I told you about. He became totally bedfast, needing constant care. Everything had to be done for him. The fear in his eyes was something you can't imagine. Music therapy gave me one last key to reaching that past term memory that I so badly needed at this time. I could always reach Tom with music. I could take his hands, get eye contact, sing a slow, soothing song, and the fear would simply leave his eyes. One day in particular, Tom seemed more aware. I can remember that afternoon that I sang the song Amazing Grace to him several times. And I'm not a musician. That just happened to be the only song I could remember the words to. I left the hospital later that evening, and within the hour they called and said that Tom had passed away. Music gave me some moments that I will always remember, and I know that it gave him peace. I do not believe that music therapy can cure the dementia, but I do believe that it can reach a part of the past term memory that other things cannot reach. And anything that can stimulate this brain can hold off the disease maybe just a little longer and give them a little bit more peace. I am convinced that music therapy is a very important link to the past for the Alzheimer patient and for their families, as it was for us. I want to thank you for letting me share this with you today.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. That's a very touching story, not too far from where you live. We are experiencing the same thing with my wife's father in North Platte, Nebraska.
Oh, yes.
And we're experiencing what you have experienced and your family's experienced. Here's a man that was born on that ranch, raised all of his kids on that ranch, now and in the same house, and now he can't find the bathroom.
Right.
Did you have, when you were going through those times, any resource of a support group or another person?
I had nothing. Tom was diagnosed at a time that Alzheimer was very, very unknown. There was one book written, The 36-Hour Day. I started to read it, and it was so clinical and so depressing, I never did finish it. We never even heard the word. But in our town of 150 people, they actually took care of my husband while I worked.
You're still living in McDonald.
I still live in McDonald.
I may have my mother-in-law call you.
I would appreciate that. I work a lot with Alzheimer patients and their families. I have support groups. I do teaching in nursing homes, and I'd be most happy to talk to her.
Because it is a terrible thing. On your husband responded to music when he was at the VA hospital. Did you know, did other patients also respond to music?
Very much so. The man that I spoke of that sang the jazz song was in his group. They, twice a year, would have a dance for us and invite the spouses, or for the patients and invite the spouses. And you'd be amazed at the people that could hardly walk that could get up and dance.
We got to taking a resource count in my state. I think we only have 6 musical therapists in the whole state of Montana. Those of you who are not from Montana, it's 148,000 square miles, but we're only 800,000 people. Would you advocate some sort of federal help in this area?
I certainly would. If you can't get enough of the music therapists themselves, I see no reason they couldn't teach the activity directors and also teach them in the way that is effective. I have seen music in nursing homes, but it has a beat. It has a lot of background. This doesn't work. You need something more calming, something more direct, and they need to learn this. And I think music therapy teachers could teach the activity teachers.
Unknowingly, now on the other hand, my parents, who are still living in northwest Missouri, we celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary the other day. Both of them still living in their own home, keeping their own garden, going on like they don't even know they're old.
Wonderful.
Quite a lot like Ms. Goldman. And 2 or 3 years ago, my mother used to play the piano.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't read music very good. She always played by ear. In fact, she learned at a theater where they had silent film, you know. We gave her one of these little electric pianos. She plays it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's great therapy.
Wonderful
and so I take your words as very weighty words here, and we appreciate you coming today. Ms. Goldman, the residents of Hebrew Home, where you live, can participate in music every day. Would you say that that's very important to their daily routine?
Very important. There are a lot of invalids there.
Think music therapy should be offered to residents in other homes like yours across this nation?
We have a resident, it's an invalid, and he plays music for us every Saturday afternoon for 2 hours. Then he plays 1 hour on Mondays mornings, and now he started playing for us every Friday night. And we have a ball, and it's sing-along, mostly. And then we have this young lady next to me, Kathy. She plays beautiful music for us on Thursday nights. Operas and she plays the records, not the piano, but she does play piano. And we just love it. And it seems that everyone became alive. But as far as myself, I grow older. Oh my gosh. Whew. I grow younger every day and love it. Another thing I want to say is that the world is changing, but music will never change. And thank you all for coming to hear me.
It's our pleasure coming to hear you. I have always been a little bit of a philosopher myself, and I've always said that music and humor cures more than pills or hypodermic needles. And I still believe that. So we thank you, three young ladies, for coming to this committee today, and I'll turn it back to my chairman, Senator Reid.
Senator Burns, thank you very much. Ladies, thank you very much for being here today. We'll now have as our next witness Dr. Oliver Sacks from New York City. Dr. Sacks, would you come forward, please? This is Robin Williams in disguise.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I first want to express my gratitude for being allowed to testify before you today. I'd submitted some written testimony, but I think I may wing it.
That testimony that has been submitted in writing, the entire transcript will be made part of the record, and please do wing it. A century ago, Nietzsche, the philosopher, wrote some fascinating notes on physiology and art. And in particular, he spoke here of the powers of music. He talked of these as being dynamic, tonic, mnemonic, concentrating, communicating, and liberating. He quoted an aphorism of Novalis, the poet, that all diseases are musical problems and all cures are musical solutions. He also said, when we listen to music, we listen with our muscles. And I think this may be a good place to start. And in a way, these insights, I think, have been clarified and confirmed and illustrated by our experience in these days. I work especially with older patients in chronic hospitals of various sorts. And neurological disabilities are particularly common among such patients, especially Parkinson's disease, strokes, and Alzheimer's disease. Together, these affect more than 10 million people in this country. I should add that I have also worked with populations of autistic and retarded people, and also with psychotic populations who can be greatly helped by music. But I will especially confine myself to speaking of the older populations and neurological disabilities. I'm constantly struck by the fact that though medicine can't offer some of these patients any decisive cure, their neurological functioning, no less than their morale, can be immensely improved by therapeutic measures of a non-medical sort, especially by human contact, by art, and above all, by music therapy. This can be equally true of elderly patients who've had orthopedic mishaps, and their rehabilitation is never a purely surgical matter. They have to get back that total integration of movement and posture which they had before the injury. Let me give you an example here. I saw one patient, an old lady, who had had a complex hip fracture, which required surgery and immobilization with a cast. Her leg hadn't recovered after this. It was apparently paralyzed and useless, although no orthopedic reason was clear for this. I asked her if her leg had ever moved. She thought for a bit and she said, yes, there was a Christmas concert a year back, and when an Irish jig was played, her foot kept time. So clearly, her leg and some part of her was capable of responding to music. Physiologically, we found a complete electrical silence in the muscles of her leg, and we couldn't find in the leg areas of the brain
any evoked potential, so-called. The leg was no longer being represented neurologically, but on occasion it could respond to music. Physiotherapy was of no help with this lady, but music therapy was of enormous help. We were able, after she told us this, to get rhythmic, automatic responses to music, first in the foot, then in the whole leg. Later we were able to get her, with support, to dance, and finally to walk. I wish I could show you a tape of all this, because this is an example of a permanent restoration of function which was made possible by music. But my special experiences, as you refer to, are with post-encephalitic and Parkinsonian patients. In patients like this, there may be a good deal of muscular stiffness and rigidity. There's great difficulty initiating movement. There can be long periods of freezing and transfixion. There's an absence of spontaneity, and even when movement and speech are possible, they tend to be feeble and rather lifeless and mechanical. But such patients show an unimpaired ability to respond, whether it's to a thrown ball or especially to music. And one can see patients who, though unable to walk, are able to dance, and patients who, though unable to talk, are able to sing. And at this stage, if it works, I'd like to show you a little bit of videotape from the documentary of Awakenings.
Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come and go. There was a heartbeat weary, Saturday and long, still to us at twilight, unloved song. That's what we're going to do like that. A long time ago.
You see how in singing the voice is transformed in this patient. It's so flat and toneless and anonymous, and when she sings it has a full volume, a full emotional range. And in another bit of this tape, I don't have enough time to show you, you see this almost immobile patient able to dance, and in this also to recover all her animation. I thought there was going to be more tape, but let me just mention another patient who is also in the documentary, another post-encephalitic patient, Rosalie, who often for hours a day would be totally transfixed, usually with a finger touching her spectacle lens. But as soon as we brought her to the piano, she loved playing, and she would be transformed when she played. And there was an ease and a fluency and a freedom and a normality which one never saw at any other time. And not only did music liberate her from her Parkinsonism, but the imagining of music would do so. She knew all Chopin by heart, and all one had to do was to say, Opus 49, and immediately the F minor fantasy would start playing in her mind, and her rigidity would disappear, her facial expression would come back, and she could move easily. And if one did an EEG, an electroencephalogram at this time, the brain activity, which was normally of an almost coma-like slowness, would also become normal while she was playing or imagining music. So here, very strikingly, music was a cure. So this power of music then to animate and to organize activity is most striking in patients with motor and motor regulatory disorders like this. And music is not a luxury to them, it's a necessity. They can't move without it. One such patient who'd been a former music teacher spoke of herself as having been unmusicked by her Parkinsonism and as needing to be remusicked in order to move. I think perhaps commoner and equally important is the power of music to mobilize elderly patients who may have become immobile because of illness or depression or lethargy or pain or fear. And immobility is a great danger in such patients. It predisposes to everything from bed sores to dementia. And music can act as a tonic and get such patients going. With regard to how it works, we can only speculate. The affected parts of the brain in Parkinsonism are the basal ganglia, which have been called the organs of succession. And if these are damaged, people have great difficulty with successions of movements, with consecutive movement. But music can apparently substitute for this damaged brain function and become a template for organizing movement and for doing. To some extent, music can act instead of the basal ganglia. This is not something mechanical. Patients don't react to any music. They have to have music they like and music which moves them. This is so in general of music therapy. There's no such thing as general music. All music is particular, and it must accord with the tastes of each patient. As music can substitute for lower functions, it can be vital in higher functions. In Alzheimer's disease, as you've heard, you can have patients who are unable to talk, to organize themselves, patients who are agitated and confused. Music for them can have an almost magical power by eliciting memories and associations and restoring to them the moods, the memories, the fluency, and the feeling of their former selves and their former lives. Music perhaps is mostly dynamic in something like Parkinsonism, but it has an evocative and mnemonic power in patients with Alzheimer's disease, which can totally recall the lost person for a while, or rather give access to lost powers and lost identity, an access which cannot be provided by anything else. Here again, as with the brief awakening of post-encephalitic patients, this restoration to self and to normality is accompanied by a temporary normalization in the EEGs. In summary, though the nervous system is sometimes compared to a computer, I think it's much more like an orchestra or a symphony. I think we are musical through and through, from the lowest levels of rhythm in our nerve cells to the highest levels. There's a vast range of neurological disorders in which this inner music is impaired, and all of these can be transformed by the healing power of music. Thank you.
Dr. Sachs, I think that we need to pause and contemplate on what's going on here today. We have you, who just isn't someone that came in from the street and with some ideas. You're a medically trained neurologist. And as a result of the work that you did, which you wrote about and now which has been depicted in a movie, it has triggered people's imaginations so that people like Theodore Bickel, Mickey Hart, who are musicians and have known all their musical lives that this magic happens, you're now here trying to explain to us that it really does happen for some medical reasons. That you should be congratulated, which we do. Now, Dr. Sachs, the thing when I watched this movie the other night, and by the way, I'd read the book beforehand. If somebody is immobile, inactive, their muscles atrophy. Now, how could these people get up and start walking and doing these things?
Well, in Parkinsonism, there may be a lot of rigidity, and rigidity itself can prevent atrophy and act like a sort of isometric exercise.
Oh, is that right?
But also, these patients had been walked. They had been walked passively, so they weren't totally immobile.
How, Dr. Sachs, and I don't know how accurate the movie was, how accurate was the movie?
It had some romantic additions, but otherwise it was reasonably accurate.
I guess the point that I wanted to make is you were a young physician going into this facility, and these patients were, and I've been in, as all politicians have, into rest homes, and the rest home there depicted is like many that I've been in Nevada. You walked in there, and why the throwing the ball and people reach up and grab ball? What caused you to think that these people could be awakened?
Well, there had been accounts and anecdotes of patients
and
suddenly moving
you had
into
studied
action.
this and remembered it, is that right?
Well, the nurses would tell me about anecdotes. The nurses were wonderful. Some of them had been with the patients for 30 years, and so had therapists. And I sometimes saw this sudden action for myself.
For those in the audience that haven't seen the movie and don't know what we're talking about, people who had been in effect asleep sat and stared off into space, throw them a ball, and they'd reach up and grab the ball. Right?
Yeah, I think probably it was closer to a sort of trance-like state or a transfixion, a spellbound state, rather than sleep.
And so anyway, why did you think that the work that you could do, that you did, would awaken these people, some of which was with music?
Well, one saw in this transfixed state that that there needed to be a drawing of attention out of their own sphere. And sometimes you would see a patient staring at the ground, and if you simply said to him, "Look over there," he could break out and look over there and maybe walk over there. But he couldn't do so alone. You had to call him. And so my first act, before any medication became possible, was to look at the different things which could call these patients out of their spellbound state. And a very strong one was music.
Now tell me, doctor, with these people, during the time that they were awakened, did they have thought processes?
Oh, yes, indeed.
I mean, the movie depicted that these people were normal during the time that they were awake. They communicated. Is that in fact the case?
Yes, it's very much the case, and one had very much the feeling of a normal personality and normal intellectual powers and thought processes which had been imprisoned or transfixed and needed to be let out.
Now, doctor, with the medication that you were giving these people, L-Dopa, I think is the name of it, it diminished. The effects of it, the positive effects of it diminished. With music, is there that same diminishing effect?
No. However deep the disability, I think the powers of music are always there and are permanent. And when the medicine wears off, music is still there. It employs a different physiological mechanism. In a way, it bypasses the Parkinsonism.
Senator Cohen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachs. You indicated in your testimony that that all music is particular. It's not universal in appreciation as such. I think Mr. Hart's going to testify that percussion perhaps is universal. And the people in the audience cannot see this, but hopefully if there's ever a replay of this hearing, they will notice that while you were testifying, your right foot was tapping and keeping beat. And you were perhaps not even aware of that. But as you were responding to questions from Senator Reid, I noticed in particular that you were tapping with your foot. So perhaps Mr. Hart can talk to us about the universality of the percussion as far as music is concerned. And of course, you were quoting Nietzsche, and it goes back a lot further than Nietzsche. Plato talked about the music of the spheres, and that the musicians were the ones closest in this whole hierarchy of development of the human being to the philosopher king. Next to the philosopher king were the musicians. And I think there's been a recognition historically of the importance of music in our lives. I was wondering, I've been doing some reading in a different field perhaps, the mind-body connection, some of the writings of Deepak Chopra, who is an Indian endocrinologist, who talks about the powers of the mind to actually engage in the healing process as well. There's more and more literature being disseminated on a very wide-scale basis, and I suspect this falls into the same category of the interconnectability of the mind in the healing process. I was wondering, would some patients or people be more responsive, let's say, to visual stimulus or stimuli as opposed to music? Art, for example, versus music. Is there anything in your experience that would indicate that a visual experience is perhaps better for a particular patient?
Well, certainly say if patients are profoundly deaf, then visual stimuli are all important. But I think other forms of art therapy are also crucial. And people with Alzheimer's disease sometimes who are no longer able to speak or conceptualize can do beautiful art and can enjoy art. And I think visual art is equally important for them.
Is it necessary to have any prior musical background for a patient to be responsive to it? Do they have to have either studied music in the past, had their parents force them to play the piano as they were growing up, as many of us were? Is there anything that goes back to prior experience? Can you have someone who has no experience really other than perhaps listening to music as a teenager? Is anything required in the way of prior experience?
I don't think any musical skill is required. I think musical responsiveness is universal, even in people who are sometimes called unmusical, and certainly responsiveness to rhythm is universal. And I should add, not only in human beings, but in many animals as well. There have been some fascinating physiological studies about the effects of music in cats. And I should add that Mozart is most effective with cats.
Bach doesn't do as well?
Apparently not.
Now, with respect to therapy or therapists, is it their job and their experience to single out the kind of music that would be most applicable to that given individual? In other words, Bach might be okay, or Mozart, but maybe not Kenny G, or maybe not the Grateful Dead.
Well, I think musical therapy always has to occur in a human relationship, and this will include exploring what the patient likes most and responds to most, and then perhaps expanding that.
Is there anything in your experience that leads you to the conclusion that music would make it possible for a permanent curative effect rather than temporary response?
Well, I think that Parkinsonian patients and patients with movement disorders can learn to imagine music and organize their own activity with it internally to a considerable extent. And I think sometimes with Alzheimer patients, once the doors have been opened, they may remain open to a considerable extent. I think The Last Witness indicated that. So I think one definitely has some after effect.
Chairman and I were just discussing, how did it come that you were able to make yourself look like Robin Williams?
People say now that I'm imitating all his gestures, but it was the other way around. But I'm.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, and the record will show that during my questioning, Dr. Sachs tried very hard to keep his foot still, but was not successful.
Senator Presser.
Thank you very much. It's a fascinating hearing, and I'm here to listen and learn. I must say that when I first heard of this hearing, I was a little bit of a skeptic, but I want to congratulate the staffs and the senators who thought of it and pulled it together, because it has opened up some new ideas to me. I too saw Awakenings, and I did not read the book, but there's one thing I was fascinated with, and I know that the prescription of drugs by psychiatrists is a controversial matter, but as I understood from the movie, and if this is a real-life situation in the book, a certain drug was prescribed, or there was certain treatment, and the people started to get better, to respond more, and then after a while the side effects of the drug brought on some negative characteristics. Is that correct? I mean, is that a...
Yes, I think to some extent this happens with all drugs, but it was particularly clear and tragic with these patients, probably because there had been so much brain damage. Perhaps 99% of the nerve cells which could respond had been knocked out, and a person couldn't maintain normality on the 1% remaining. The film actually was somewhat grimmer than the reality, and in fact many patients were able to get through some of the side effects, and some of them are still alive, and one of them in fact came along to the set and did a scene. And so certainly, although drugs are not the answer in Parkinsonism or anything, they were crucial for these patients.
Well, leading to the government's role and things such as that, and I had a family member who died of Alzheimer's, so I've been fascinated for a long time. There's always a belief by some Alzheimer's patients and their relatives that they can get some drug in Mexico that they can't get here, and our government, I guess, is fairly reluctant to allow drugs to be used by people until they have been, their efficacy and their complete results have been checked out. Have we been too cautious on letting drugs be tried with people with, say, Alzheimer's, which is hopeless anyway?
Well, that's a delicate question, but I think I think probably so. We became extremely cautious in this country after the thalidomide tragedy in England and Europe, when tens of thousands of people were born with birth defects after mothers had taken the sleeping drug thalidomide. I think we're a little overcautious, and certainly with drugs for Parkinsonism and Tourette syndrome, there are many which are very well established and confirmed in Europe, but are not available here, and typically people smuggle these in. I think the situation is less clear with Alzheimer's disease, although there are a number of drugs which are promising for symptoms, and perhaps some others which at a deeper level may have some promise of slowing down the disease process itself.
Yeah. Now, switching back to the subject of this hearing, music and aging, what are you saying to us as senators? Should we try to appropriate money to have more music? Should we give NIH money to do research on this? What do you want us to do?
20 years ago, when New York State looked into the business of having a music therapist at Beth Abraham Hospital, which is the Hospital of Awakenings, they said, but this is mere entertainment. It's trivial. What does it do? I showed them the effects of music in our Parkinsonian population and with our Alzheimer population. I showed them how much the quality of life and how much all sorts of medical complications could be avoided. And then they changed their mind and they provided funds. In a practical sense, I think that music therapy and music therapists are are crucial and indispensable in institutions for elderly people and among neurologically disabled patients. I think that what is pragmatic and intuitive needs to be investigated. One needs to know what goes on. And there's really no research on the subject. There needs to be funding for such research.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think also there needs to be some proper awareness and respect for music and music therapy so that it's not seen as something just trivial or entertaining.
Yes. Good. That's an excellent statement. Now, turning to the NIH, what does the NIH do that's close to this, the National Institutes of Health, in terms of research?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Do we have any research along those lines? Are there any private research foundations that are doing?
Yes, there's certainly some private research foundations. For example, the effects of music with autistic children is a subject of considerable research, privately funded. Here also special groups like the parents of autistic children are often important in donating funds.
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much. I may have some more questions for the record, if the record is going to be kept open.
Sure will be. We all have lots of questions for you, Dr. Sachs. We could spend the day with you. We regrettably cannot do that. Thank you very much for allowing us to use some of your time here today.
Thank you.
Next panel of witnesses today consists of Mr. Mickey Hart of Sonoma County, California, and Mr. Theodore Bickel of Wilton, Connecticut. Would Mr. Bickel and Mr. Hart please come forward? We'll first hear from Mickey Hart.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you on this issue of great importance to me. This is the issue of how drumming, the rhythmic manipulation of sound, can be used for health and healing. I also would like to express my support for the concept of preventative rather than crisis medicine, and specifically the role of music therapy as a means of maintaining mental, spiritual, and physical health in people of all ages. I am a professional percussionist. For over 40 years, I've lived and I've played with rhythm, as an entertainer, as an author, and always as a student. Over the last 10 years, I've spent much of my time exploring rhythm and its effect on the human body. Why is it so powerful and attractive? I've written on this subject in my books, Strumming at the Edge of Magic and Planet Drum, which try to address these questions. And yet I know that I've barely scratched the surface, particularly regarding the healing properties of rhythm and music. Everything exists in time, has a rhythm and a pattern. Our bodies are multidimensional rhythm machines, with everything pulsing in synchrony, from the digesting activity of our intestines to the firing of neurons in the brain. Within the body, the main beat is laid down by the cardiovascular system, the heart and the lungs. The heart beats between 60 and 80 times per minute, and the lungs fill and empty at about a quarter of that speed, all of which occurs at an unconscious level. As we age, however, these rhythms can fall out of sync, and then, suddenly, there is no more important or crucial issue than regaining that lost rhythm. What is true for our own bodies is true almost everywhere we look. We are embedded within a rhythmic universe. Everywhere we see rhythm, patterns moving through time. It is there in the cycles of the seasons, in the migration of the birds and the animals, in the fruiting and withering of the plants, and in the birth, maturation, and death of our cells. By acknowledging this fact and acting on it, our potential for preventing illness and maintaining mental, physical, and spiritual well-being is far greater. As a species, we love to play with rhythm. We deal with it every second of our lives, right to the end. When the rhythm stops, so do we. And this is where music becomes important. According to the late ethnomusicologist John Blacking, music is a mirror that reflects a culture's deepest social and biological rhythms. It is an externalization of the pulses that remain hidden beneath the busyness of daily life. Blacking believed that a large part of music's power and pleasure comes from its ability to reconnect us with the deeper rhythms that we are not conscious of. And it is the connection with these rhythms that gives music the power to heal. Music as humanly organized sound or vibration has played a pivotal role in the development of our species, beginning with tool making, the tool record. All those delicately chipped arrowheads and choppers is a dramatic illustration of our battle to master the subtle body rhythms that any advanced civilization requires to survive. In order to create the tools that allowed us to move forward as a species, we learned to scrape, strike, rub, shake, and swing in rhythm. From there, we gathered in groups to sing our songs, to tell our stories, to dance our dances, all in rhythm. We found that by gathering together in this way, it reinforced our sense of community and family. The natural extension was the use of rhythm, and specifically percussion instruments, in healing ceremonies by traditional medical practitioners. As modern technology takes us further and further from our natural rhythms, the use of percussion for healing has greater potential than ever. Today, without thoroughly understanding it, thousands of people across the country have turned to drumming as a form of practice, like prayer, meditation, or the martial arts. It is a practice that is widely acknowledged to help focus attention and to help people break free of the boredom and stress of daily life. More importantly, drumming is a way of approaching and playing with the deeper mysteries of rhythm. Typically, people gather to drum in drum circles with others from the surrounding community. The drum circle offers equality because there is no head or tail. It includes people of all ages. The main objective is to share rhythm and to get in tune with each other and themselves, to form a group consciousness, to entrain and resonate. And by entrainment, I mean that a new voice, a collective voice, emerges from the group as they drum together. The drummers each bring their own instruments and drum together for about half an hour. Afterwards, there's a discussion of issues of importance to the group. The drumming helps to facilitate this discussion because as they drum, the group forms a common bond. From groups of women drummers to 12-step groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, to gatherings of men who are part of the ever-growing men's movement, drumming is used to open up channels of communication and foster community and family. While some drum groups form around a particular issue, others have no agenda whatsoever, except to allow the members an opportunity to come together, play their instruments, and share rhythm. Older Americans are largely unfamiliar with this movement, and yet these are the people who could benefit the most. The formation of drum circles among the elderly should be an integral part of any music therapy program. There is a large and enthusiastic group of drummers who could be called upon to lead workshops and make instructional videos and to be distributed among the older population now isolated in nursing homes and retirement communities. It would be emphasized that the object is not public performance. Because when we speak of this type of drumming, we are speaking of a deeper realm in which there is no better or worse, no modern or primitive, no distinctions at all, but rather an almost organic compulsion to translate the emotional fact of being alive into sound, into rhythm, into something you can dance to. Through drum circles, the aging population could tap into this realm, into these rhythms. The benefits would be wide-ranging. First, there would be immediate reduction in feelings of loneliness and alienation through interaction with each other and heightened contact with the outside world. While today many older people spend hours each day sitting in front of television, drumming is an activity which would allow them direct exposure to younger people from the outside community. Whereas verbal communication can often be difficult among the generations and in the sickly, in the drum circle, nonverbal communication is the means of relating. Natural byproducts of this are increased self-esteem and the resulting sense of empowerment, creativity, and enhanced ability to focus the mind. Not to mention just plain fun. This leads to a reduction in stress, while involving the body in a non-jarring, safe form of exercise that invigorates, energizes, and centers. There is no question of the substantial benefits which could be derived from increased funding for the study and research of music therapy. This funding is critical to explore the most effective ways to utilize the techniques described here by the other speakers. Billions of dollars are spent each year for crisis care, while little energy is spent trying to figure out how to avoid the crisis to begin with. A shift from crisis medicine to preventive medicine needs to occur. The introduction of drum circles and percussion instruments into the older American population is a new medicine for a new culture. It was a good idea 10,000 years ago, and it's a good idea today. Thank you.
Mr. Hart, if you would remain seated while Mr. Bickel gives his testimony, we have questions for both of you. Mr. Bickel?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if you assume that Dr. Sachs was Robin Williams in disguise, I hope you're not going to assume that the words that are about to emanate from my mouth will really be spoken by Milli Vanilli. And I'm going to watch my feet, too, while I speak. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Theodore Bickel. I am a musician, a singer, and actor. I also serve as president of the Associated Actors and Artists of America, the umbrella organization under whose roof you will find all the unions and guilds representing performers in all disciplines, from theater to opera to TV to films and variety. What expertise I may have personally, I derive from a lifelong career as a stage actor and as a concert performer and musician. I'm also no stranger to the interaction between the arts and government, having served for 5 years as a member of the National Council on the Arts at a time when that body enjoyed better reputation than it does today, or at least a better image in the public's mind. And I thank you for having invited me to take part in the inquiry. Mr. Chairman, as a rule, congressional inquiries are prompted by pragmatic motives, leading directly to the enactment of some measure or another. While this may very well be the case here, too, I am nonetheless heartened by the impression that in the first instance, the committee seeks information, thought, leading to more thought. If at some time a utilitarian purpose will emerge and some programs are put into place, so much the better. But we too are in need of this interchange of thoughts, for we come looking, not for money, but for knowledge. For far too long have we looked upon the needs of the elderly with a painfully narrow focus. A mistake, by the way, we also make when contemplating the needs of the very young. As a basic premise, I hope we can agree that to view the needs of the aging in terms of physical survival alone makes very little sense. We are slowly beginning to discard the notion that the care of the very young and the very old are to be viewed primarily in terms of the utilitarian aspects of the process. For there is a demonstrated need to build and nurture the mind through aesthetic awareness. Human beings are in need of music, indeed of all the arts, as Dr. Oliver Sacks said, not as frills and luxuries, but as a basic necessity. In the last analysis, mere physical survival is meaningless without its cultural corollary. For the question is constantly posed, survival to what purpose? To eat, to sleep, to wake and eat again, or to see, to touch, to smell, to hear the sounds of music, of laughter, and of grief, to learn and to continue to learn until the last minute, in other words, enrichment, or if you prefer, fulfillment. Mr. Chairman, I cannot attest to the healing power of music the way doctors, scientists, or therapists can. I can only claim what years of experience have demonstrated to me many times over, that music not only lifts the spirit, but heals the soul. I've even seen it give a physical lift to persons whose very ability to move was close to zero, as has been described here before. And that led to surprisingly successful attempts at foot tapping and even dancing. I have on numerous occasions performed in senior citizens' retirement homes, Many in those audiences were confined to wheelchairs. Some were even brought in on the gurney. The ambulatory residents, too, were not much better off. Their faces showed resignation, apathy, and lethargy. Healthcare personnel offered apologies to me in advance, fearing what to a performer might seem an insulting lack of reception. More often than not, these fears turned out to be unfounded. Not only was the lethargy gone while the music played, but the effects lingered on for quite a while afterwards. I submit that this has less to do with how I play and sing, but rather with the kind of music I make. This is a country of immigrants. Many older Americans have roots and antecedents in Europe and elsewhere. Contrary to popular belief, we are not a melting pot, nor should we be. We're a kaleidoscope. In a melting pot, everything flows together to form an ill-defined, no shape, no color, indistinct mass. In a kaleidoscope, everything is clearly delineated and all contribute to the beauty of the whole. Many senior citizens may lose strength and vitality, but they do hold on to the memories of their youth. Anything that evokes these memories will put them into a brighter and happier frame of mind. Mr. Chairman, I am multilingual. I sing in 21 languages, 5 of which I speak with fluency. I've been able to play Greek songs to Greeks, French songs to Frenchmen, Spanish songs to Hispanics, and Russian songs to all manner of Eastern Europeans. Most of all, I sing and play what my own family tradition has bequeathed to me by way of Jewish music. Thus, I've often observed old and infirm persons as the sounds of their ethnic heritage brought them out of a near catatonic state. They managed to laugh, to sing along, and even to clap to the sounds of their youth. It seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that rather than seeking to eliminate multi-ethnic diversity in this nation, we should look to its salutary effects and use it constructively in the treatment of older Americans. Now, I have so far spoken of the effect of music on older people who live in retirement or nursing homes. Despite the fact that these older folk are constantly surrounded by other residents, by health personnel, by social workers and other staff, their existence is basically a lonely one. My own mother, who has been in a home for the past 9 years, feels, rightly or wrongly, that she has little in common with the people around her and keeps mostly to herself. Beyond the day-to-day pleasantries, conversation is apt to lead to disagreements, which in older people rankle more deeply than they would with us. I assume that we are younger. It doesn't always hold true. However, get these people to sit together and listen to music, and a bond develops. The shared experience may not last beyond the recital, but while it is there, it is real. That brings up the question of what is to be done for older Americans who are not, for whatever reason, confined to nursing homes, who live alone or with family. Even living with a family cannot ward off the feeling of loneliness and isolation. Family members have their own agendas, and quality time with grandma or grandpa is a rare occurrence. Shared musical events with the family are even rarer. Now, could grandpa get as much from the music in the solitude of his room? Do tapes and records furnished to the elderly have the same beneficial effect as a live musical experience? I doubt it. If it is true that pets are a source of great comfort and healing for the old, then surely toy dogs won't be just as good. No, it is important, 1, for it to be live, and 2, to have venues where seniors can share the experience. Daycare centers for the aged can play a very useful role here. The same van services which pick up seniors for their regular hospital visits might well be used to carry them to recitals or other musical events. But the events have to be planned with a great deal of care. Now, this brings up the question of who is to coordinate and lead these activities. Now, I'm not speaking here of trained people in music therapy, but as a rule, in nursing homes, retirement villages, and daycare centers, these activities are often dumped in the lap of an already overburdened staff person, a nurse, or a social worker. Now, in order to direct and supervise these activities, they go through some rudimentary crash courses in the arts. Now, I submit that we are missing a bet here. There is a vast pool of underemployed artists in this country, including musicians, dancers, singers. Some of them may themselves be close to retirement age. Would it not be far more beneficial to use these people to plan music, to play it, to encourage older people to participate? Not to replace medical personnel or social workers, but to free them for the duties they are properly trained for, which in any case keep them fully occupied. To be sure, not every artist is a born group leader. People have to be trained to do that as well. But it is far more difficult, I submit, to teach a nurse some musical knowledge than it is to teach a musician how to reach out to other people, or to teach. A training program for artists to work with the elderly would most assuredly benefit the nation. In conclusion, I would ask you to contemplate the following. Some of our basic assumptions about the aged can be reduced to 3 equations. Old age equals poverty, old age equals loneliness, old age equals infirmity and sickness. Of course, many old people are neither sick nor poor nor lonely. But for those who are, there are ways to alleviate the hardship. Above all, there's music. With some talent, some skill, and a lot of love, we may be able to employ music to enrich the poor, give company to the lonely, and heal the sick. Thank you.
Mr. Bickel, I'm fascinated, being from Nevada, where there's been a significant change in recent years with the playing of tapes and synthesizers and all kinds of things that eliminate the need for live music in the minds of some people. And the new president of the National Musicians Union is a man from Las Vegas. And he's made that point many times, that there should be more things for these people to do who've dedicated their lives to music. And you, I think, have pointed us in the right direction. And I think there was a question asked, what's the purpose of this hearing? I think the purpose of this hearing is to alert Congress, the American public, that there is an inexpensive way to alleviate pain, loneliness, and suffering, and in effect heal people in some instances, and that's music. And so there is going to have to be more work done to focus attention on the fact that music can do a lot of things that people didn't think it could do, as in the words of Dr. Sachs, that it's not trivial or only for entertainment purposes. And if we can come out of this hearing with nothing more than that, I think we've made a significant contribution to people's good health. Mr. Hart, how many drums do you have?
Many.
Well,
Hundreds.
Yeah, you're a collector of percussion instruments. And in reading your book, which I just got last night, I haven't read it, but I will do that before the next week passes, you indicate that there are some musical instruments that you have had stored and haven't had a chance to play with them.
Not many, but a few.
Yeah. Tell us specifically how you feel drumming or music can be used as a preventive health care to keep medical expenditures down.
Well, drumming really is it's the artful manipulation of rhythm and noise, and that empowers you. Then when you hear a loud sound, it allows you to center around it. It describes the sacred space where you're going to play, and it enhances your concentration. It releases adrenaline. It does a lot of things. It allows for community. This is the most important thing. It allows you to share rhythm with someone on an equal basis. And I think that's the biggest power of music.
Well, obviously, you and the Grateful Dead have had some indication of what pleases people, because you've been going longer than anyone imagined you could. And this year, you're the leading tour group in the world.
That's what they say.
Part of that success were your 2 concerts in Las Vegas, which were your 2 biggest,
Pardon me, what was the last thing?
I say part of that success were your 2 concerts in Las Vegas, which were your 2 largest.
Yes, yes. Well, here you see, this is what we would call group rapture. This is where a lot of people come together to share an experience, and that's what music is all about, really. It's to share that experience.
And I think we've all experienced the anticipation of going to someone you really wanted to listen to. And when you get there, it's exciting, and that's what we're talking about here on a smaller scale, are we not?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
I'd like you both to comment on this. Rhythmic entrainment is a well-established principle in the physical sciences. You put 2 clocks or a bunch of clocks in this room, and soon they'll tick together. That's a scientifically proven fact. Can you gentlemen describe in your own words this phenomenon and tell us how this could relate to human health?
Well, may I? Well, entrainment isn't just a mechanical law. It also has to do with the heart. You can entrain to a city. You can entrain when you walk down the street with your wife. You can entrain with her. You walk in time with her. You beat in time with someone. That's what entrainment really is. It's the resonance, the rhythmic resonance that you have with somebody or something around you, and that's what music does, and that's the main ingredient in group music. Music, when you play music privately, that's another story. You entrain with the drum or the instrument you're with. It's a focusing technique. Percussion happens to be one of the most the drum has to be one of the most elegant tools that man has ever devised for the making of rhythm, and that's why I believe so strongly in rhythm.
I've been in many societal situations, Senator, where the togetherness aspect of the music was almost as important and sometimes more important than the music itself. The music was not necessarily well sung or well played, because it's not always played by professionals or by people who devote their life to music, but that togetherness aspect created something that was far greater than the music that was being made. I recall in the 60s, when I was arrested in the South for civil rights activity and put in jail for a period, that the music kept us alive together. And while we were put in segregated jails, the whites in one portion of the jail and the blacks in another, we sang across the courtyard with each other, and we were one. And it meant more than the music.
In your opinion, well, as you talk a lot about ethnic music having a powerful effect on people from that ethnic group. And if we refer back to Dr. Sachs' testimony that was in writing that he didn't give verbatim, there are a couple lines here. It says, "So it is not sufficient usually to put on a loud rock band or muzak. There must be a sensitive exploration, first of the kind of music that works for each patient. There is no general music. Music is particular, and it works in the first place by evoking a particular response." And that's why when you go to, at least I'm seeing if you'll agree with me, that's why when you go to a rest home, and for example, there are people there who are Jewish, and you sing something in Yiddish, that could bring back a memory of that person's childhood. Is that right?
It is absolutely correct, and it really enlivens not only the moment, but brings back a whole slew of associative things that the people had buried somewhere, and brings them out of the shell.
You, I hope, had the opportunity to listen to the excerpt I read from Dana Gentry, who used to work for me. Well, it's a wonderful story, and I only read part of her letter. This woman, that her grandmother was in a trance, using the words of Dr. Sachs. She was oblivious to everybody around. And she and her mother would go feed this old lady, and she couldn't feed herself. And so one day, Dana just started singing True Love. You know, I think Elvis Presley or somebody sang it, I don't know. But it was something that grandmother sung to her grandchild. And as soon as she started singing the song for the first time, the grandmother came awake. And now music is what they use for therapy with this woman. And even though it's for brief periods of time, the grandmother is herself for a very short period of time. So appreciate very much your adding your expertise as musicians to the medical testimony rendered by Dr. Sachs?
I gave a copy of a letter to Dr. Sachs just before this session started, which arrived in my home only 3 days ago. A woman wrote to me who's from a little town in Missouri after I'd given a concert in St. Louis. She had brought her autistic son, who was 30 years old and deaf because of his autism, deaf to all intents and purposes. He reacts, for some reason or another, to my music. They have tapes of my stuff playing in the car, and they brought him to the concert. And she said, as a footnote, he's not even Jewish. And at the end of my concert, he stood up and made the love sign in sign language. And on the way home in the car, the son turned to his mother and he said, "I hear a bird singing." That person's deaf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask, Mr. Hart, is this the first time you've ever testified before a congressional committee?
No, I testified for the rainforest about 2 years ago.
I was going to say, I thought it would be entirely appropriate that your first appearance be in the Hart Building. So I guess I can't say that now.
Feels like home.
And I was curious when you stated, and by the way, I must say I have some affinity. I feel some affinity. I have one of my sons who has followed you across the country at least once.
God save you.
And back. And I never
All of our sons have.
And I never quite understood what the term deadhead meant until I listened to the music. But
excuse me, Senator? Could you
I meant that in a positive way. He is a big fan, and I have tapes of yours that we both listen to quite frequently. You mentioned in your book, in one of the passages, you said a village without music is a dead place, or that's an African proverb. Is it your assessment that the same applies for the soul, the person? Without the music, it's a dead place as such. Does that apply?
Well, we've had music in every culture since prehistory. You know, we've seen it on the walls of the caves at 15,000 BC. We've seen it in the mother goddess cultures of Neolithic, 8,000, 10,000. We've seen it in every culture worldwide. There must be a reason for this, and we couldn't be making this story up. We find that all cultures have musics of some kind, some vocal music, some percussive music. It's inherent to the nature of man. You know, it's just that simple. We love to dance to our music. We make music to celebrate. We make music to communicate, to be born by, to die by. All rites of passage usually are accompanied by some musical accompaniment. So I would say without music, it would be a dead place, yes.
I noticed when you said that before, when the music stops, we die. I remember that song by Don McLean, The Day the Music Died.
Yeah.
Very powerful song.
I might add something, Senator, that which I overlooked before, that there's two ways to listen to music. We're not talking about entertainment here. There's a spiritual way. There's a realm of the spirit, which goes to the soul. And then there's the entertainment message. So music is far-reaching. Music therapy is just the latest development in the understanding of vibration. And that's really what it's all about, rhythm and vibration.
Mr. Bickle, if I were a rich man, I would still want very much to hear your music. And in fact, it plays over my mind so many times at various moments. And not when we're talking about congressional pay raises, I can assure you. But let me ask you, what do you think the role of the arts community should be in this particular category? You mentioned it perhaps doesn't hold up to what it used to be in today's times. What is the role of the arts community, and Mr. Hart as well? I mean, should we be trying to train artists to go into nursing homes, to rest homes, to deal with the elderly? Is there a training program that the arts community ought to be supporting, sponsoring? I know that you volunteered much of your time in doing this. Do you think that an organized institutional approach has some merit?
I advocated, especially in light of the fact that the profession is so overcrowded and there's too many people chasing too few jobs, and there are many unemployed musicians, unemployed singers, unemployed dancers who wait on tables or perhaps just wait for the next job to come along, and who have training, who have years of training in music, and whose talents can be put to good use in co-opting them, in training them how to do these things, to work with older people, with sick people, and to have them do good music in the places where the good music is needed.
So do you think then the National Endowment for the Arts ought to be directing some of its energies in this?
I think it ought to think along those lines, yes.
Mr. Hart, how about you, in terms of training other individuals to start engaging in music therapy, as such as you indicated? It's not simply entertainment, it's curative, and I was particularly interested in your notions of wellness. You didn't phrase it such as wellness, but that's inherent in what you were saying about the importance of music in creating a sense of self-esteem, which is vitally important to maintaining a physical well-being as well.
Yes. Well, like Mr. Bickel said, there are a lot of unemployed musicians around, and they could be used. This could be like could be a task force kind of a thing. They could go into retirement homes, into hospitals. They could lead group drumming circles. They can instruct. They could participate. There's an army out there. They just need the word to march. It's really it's just one of those things. There's a lot of musicians. As a matter of fact, 1% of the population, I believe, we would consider drummers in this world. We figured out that there's about 1% of the population are drummers.
We have Meals on Wheels. Why not have music on wheels coming to the homes?
Yeah.
Very much. Mr. Hart, just one curious thing. In your book, you referred, in one of the chapters, I think it's Hole in the Sky, and you referred to a Joseph Campbell.
That's
Was
right.
he the model for the book, The Peaceful Warrior?
The model for what?
The Peaceful Warrior, The Ways of the Peaceful Warrior, because you referred to him as a warrior.
No, not really. Joe was a good friend, and he was a warrior in his own right, and anybody can be a warrior. He just happened to fall on the power of the drum in his search for in the origin myths of our species. We find that most of the origin stories have percussion in them, and Joe was an intrepid warrior, and he went after it, and we shared these interests. There was only a few people I could talk to about stalactites at 20,000 BC. You know, he was one of them. So he was a warrior, but no.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman.
We have a vote pending, so we're going to have to terminate the hearing at this time. We appreciate very much the testimony of Mr. Hart, Mr. Bickel. You've added significantly to this hearing. What I'd like to do, and this is very unusual, Senator Cohen, what I'd like to do while we're gone, which will be about 7 or 8 minutes, I'd like to call on Ken Medema to come and entertain the audience while I'm not here, while Senator Cohen's not here. This is, and this may be one way to employ musicians, because we're gone a lot. We shall return for the Senate stands in recess for about 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is one of those standing up songs again, so if you don't mind, the way it works is that I will sing a line and you'll sing it after me, if you please. Stand up together, dance all night long. Stand up together, till we know one another and our fears are gone. Together, everybody. Dance all night long. Yeah, yeah, stand up together. Till we know one another and our fears are gone. Shake the hand of 10 people near you. Say your name real loud so they can hear you. Shake the hand of 10 people near you. This is the time, let's get to it and make no delay, 'cause we've got to do it and shake those hands. together. Oh, dance all night long. I said stand up together until we know one another and our fears are gone. Here we come. We are the children. We are the children of a new tomorrow. A new tomorrow, so full of promise. Here we come, with these hands, we'll build the bridges, of understanding,